I wanted at this point to introduce us in the course to the work of Giorgio Agamben, and especially the short piece, an appendix to his book, What is Philosophy? The Supreme Music, since it is particularly helpful to situate in a contemporary context the relevance of Plato's overall discussion of musicae, censorship, and the city in books 2, 3, and 10 of the Republic. Agamben is a contemporary Italian philosopher and still active at the age of 78, and he's likely the greatest living continental philosopher in the world, in my opinion. When he was young, he attended Heidegger's seminars in France, and Heidegger seems to have been quite fond of him, as you can see in these pictures. Agamben begins this short piece, which is clearly very much indebted to Plato's Republic, with the claim that today philosophy is possible only as a reformation of music. This is not a new problematic, but a very old one, and it's the central problematic of Plato's Republic. Music, or muse, is the experience of an actual muse, not just aesthetic sound, the origin and taking place of the word. It was this deep enshrining of the concept of muse, music, or musicae, in terms of inspiration from a muse as the source or origin, and as the origin of language, that Plato is both indebted to and takes to task in the Republic and also elsewhere in the Cratylus. The difficulties here and Plato's failure to carry off the final victory of philosophy over poetry goes back to the simple idea that there is no pure language or logos independent of music and the muse. For Agamben, as for Plato's own contemporaries, the origin of language can only be evoked or reminisced musaically or musically, which is to say there is no pure word or logos independent of the sonorous dimension as well as the religious. The Greeks thus spoke of the 9 muses, or 9 modalities in which the word takes place or becomes an event. And Hesiod's beginning from the muses and his unique experience of them is a basic initiatory origin of poetic language. In Agamben's reading of Republic 398 to 399, emotional moods necessarily belong to music before belonging to words. Balanced, courageous, and strict in the Doric musical mode, mournful and languid in the Ionic and the Lydian. And for Agamben, it is peculiar that still in the masterpiece of 20th century philosophy in Heidegger's Being and Time, the original opening of man to the world does not take place through rational knowledge and language, but through a Stimmung, that is, an emotional mood, and this very term refers back to the acoustic sphere, Stimme meaning voice. For Agamben, the muse, music, marks the splitting between man and his language, between the voice and logos, and the primary opening of the human being to the world is not logical but musical, and it is from this point of view that we can witness the peculiar and novel suggestion of Plato's Republic in its views on music as a whole. Whereas in all previous thought, word follows harmony and rhythm, in Plato, harmony and rhythm must follow logos. Plato focuses for the first time almost exclusively on what is language in the song, and suggests that music and language are separable. In his context, such a severing can by no means be taken for granted as it is for us. During the 5th and the 4th centuries BCE, new musical styles emerged constantly in Greece and tended to fracture linguistic and musical unity. The word emerged as dominant, and this is a trait shared by Plato and the sophists. Music gradually began to become independent and to pursue its art form independently of dance and the word, music, dance, and the word all being components of Plato's concept of musicae. For more on this fascinating topic, you can check out Thrasyboulos Georgiadis' short book, Greek Music, Verse, and Dance. For better or for worse, Plato's critique of the poets and of musicae, and his severing within musicae of language from gesture, tone, rhythm, and harmony, prioritizing of the idea or form within language or logos, and dialectic philosophy, as Socrates had taught the highest form of music, still seems today excessively conservative, and yet these Platonic critiques were repeated throughout the centuries, and in the end formed the basis of music's own self-understanding as a branch of human culture distinct from language and reason. For Agamben, if our access to the world is still, in a certain sense, musaically determined, we gain a better basis for understanding the Greeks, for whom the nexus between music and politics was so evident that Plato and Aristotle treat musical questions only in the works that they consecrate to politics. Quote, the relation of what they called musicae, which included poetry, music and dance, with politics is so close in the Republic that Plato subscribes to Damon's aphorism, according to which musical modes cannot be changed without changing the fundamental laws of the city. This makes sense in Plato's cultural context, insofar as men come together and organize the constitutions of their city through language, but the experience of language, insofar as it is not possible to grasp and master its origin, is in turn already conditioned musically. Music is thus one of the chief vehicles of social control, and this is why Plato devotes so much attention to it in the Republic. According to Agamben, the Greeks knew perfectly well what we tend to ignore, namely, that it is first possible to manipulate and control a society not only through language, but first and foremost through music. Just as for a soldier the trumpet blast or a drum beat is effective and more superior than a spoken command, so in every field and before every discourse, the feelings and moods that precede action and thought are musically determined and oriented. And in this sense, the state of music, which is really a better term for what Plato had in mind here than art, defines the political conditions of a given society better than and prior to any other index. If we truly want to modify the rules of a city, it is first of all necessary to reform its music. And Agamben can still say today, sounding very much like Plato in the Republic, the bad music that today pervades our cities at every moment and in every place is inseparable from the bad politics that governs them. With Plato, philosophy indeed emerges as the critique and overcoming of the reigning musical organization of the Athenian polis. Seen as a vehicle of divine destiny, from which the possessed rhapsode and the spectators are suspended, Plato in the Republic comes out against this musaic paideia, or musical education, and claims for the first time philosophy as the true muse and the supreme music. Plato's goal here, as in the Phaedo, is to go back beyond and before inspiration towards that event of the word whose threshold is shielded and barred by the muse. And for this reason, Plato can define philosophy as auta e musa, or the muse herself. According to Agamben, Plato's emphasis on philosophy over music in the Republic is a situating of the philosopher within the original event of language. The philosopher brings man back to the place of his becoming human, i.e. the logos, the only place from which he can remember the time in which he was not yet a man. Philosophy in its Platonic form is constituted as a trespass of musaic principles. The poet, under the inspiration of a muse, is also in archaic thought the repository of memory, the muses themselves being the daughters of memory, Mnemosyne, and the three original muses being Melite, Iode, and Memne. In this way, we can best understand Plato's teaching that knowledge is recollection, or anamnesis, remembering, as an essential step in Plato's trespass on traditional musaic principles. Only the philosopher completes the journey, or nostos, in the direction of memory, truly acquires through his knowledge of the forms Mnemosyne, and in this way is not at the whims of a muse, but rather becomes a free individual, free from the divine fate or destiny, and thus for the first time in a realm in which freedom and thought are possible on the basis of philosophical principles and mastery of a language beyond its musaic origin. In fact, thought is the dimension that is opened up when, going back beyond the musaic inspiration that does not allow man to know what he says, man somehow becomes the octor, that is, the guarantor and the witness of his own words and his own actions. This model of autonomous thought and autonomous self-development in light of the philosophic muse being Plato's teaching and way of life, the bios theoretikos, which should undergird and control the world of politics and action. According to Agamben, what contemporary music and philosophy, and for that matter, politics is still missing, is precisely this deeper experience of the symmetry and rupture of music and logos inaugurated in the Platonic project. If music is constitutively bound to the experience of the limits of language, and if vice versa, the experience of the limits of language and politics is musically conditioned, then an analysis of the music of our times should begin by noting that it is precisely this experience of the musaic limits that music is now missing. Language is today given as a chatter that never clashes with its limit and seems to have lost all awareness of its intimate nexus with what cannot be said, that is, with the time when man was not yet a speaker, but a musician. A language without margins and frontiers corresponds to a music that is no longer musaically tuned, and a music that has turned its back on its origins corresponds to a politics without consistency in place. The continuing relevance of Plato's Republic to our society. For us, it seems that everything can be indifferently said is mere meaning information, and in this way singing disappears, and with it the emotional moods that are always articulated musaically. Our society, in which music seems frenetically to pervade everywhere, is actually the first human community that is neither musaically nor amusaically tuned. The general feeling of depression and apathy only registers the loss of the musaic nexus within language. Our way of thinking goes round and round in circles of information and discourse that eclipse the political, precisely in being no longer inspired from a plurality of musaic contents. Separating language and music, both end up being consigned to the same vacuity. Agamben, what is essential is that the link between music and language be reforged. If, following Hannah Arendt's suggestion, thought coincides with the ability to interrupt the meaningless flux of sentences and sounds, stopping this flux in order to give it back to its musaic place is today the ultimate philosophical task.